Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. She married a man for a visa, but what she found instead was something entirely unexpected. Our story today takes us to a small town in Texas, where Mark Davis, a struggling law student, is facing the harsh realities of life. At just 23, he is barely holding it together. His father's debts weigh him down, and with his final year of law school ahead, the financial burden is crushing. Every day feels like he's walking on the edge, balancing between hope and despair. One rainy afternoon, Mark receives a mysterious phone call from Eleanor Brooks, a name he's heard of but never imagined he'd speak to. She's a 71-year-old, wealthy woman, and she wants to meet him. As Mark steps into the bistro, his jacket soaked from the downpour, he's greeted by Eleanor, a striking woman in a tailored suit. She cuts straight to the point. "I know about your debts. I know you're struggling. Marry me, and I'll take care of everything." Mark laughs, thinking it's some sort of joke, but Eleanor's face remains serious. She offers him an arrangement that will solve all his problems, but it comes at a price. She wants a business arrangement, not a romance. No love, just companionship. At first, Mark is taken aback by the audacity of her proposal. But as Eleanor lays out the details, his situation becomes more dire. There's a deadline on his future, and he has no other choice but to agree. Mark's mind races as he contemplates the offer. He's skeptical, torn between his pride and the overwhelming desire to protect his family from financial ruin. Eleanor doesn't need love, she says. She's spent her life alone, and she's looking for someone to help her maintain her legacy. The marriage would be strictly business, no strings attached. Mark agrees reluctantly, signing the contract. His family's future depends on it. The next week, they're married in a small ceremony with only Eleanor's lawyer as a witness. The deal is done. As they settle into their new lives, Mark can't help but feel like he's playing a part in someone else's life. Eleanor is kind, but their relationship is cold, transactional. He moves into her grand estate, a mansion that feels more like a museum than a home. The luxury is overwhelming, but Mark feels like a visitor, an outsider in a world he doesn't belong to. Meanwhile, Eleanor remains distant, focused on her business affairs, with little interest in Mark beyond their agreement. Then, one evening, everything changes. Mark is invited to an exclusive gala, and he accompanies Eleanor as her husband. It's a grand affair, filled with high-profile guests and business elites. Mark, still trying to adjust to this new life, finds himself at a table with strangers who see him as nothing more than a trophy husband. He's uncomfortable, out of place, until he notices Eleanor in the crowd. For the first time, he sees her not as a businesswoman, but as a woman who spent her life alone, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Something inside him shifts. As the night goes on, they share a brief conversation, and for a fleeting moment, Eleanor's guard drops. She reveals that she's not just a wealthy businesswoman but someone who's been through immense loss in her life. She talks about the loneliness that's haunted her for years. Mark begins to see her in a new light, no longer as a cold, calculating woman but as someone who has been searching for connection, just like him. In that moment, Mark realizes that this marriage, this business arrangement, has the potential to be something more. He doesn't know what it is yet, but he feels a shift inside him. Maybe he's not just here for the money. Maybe there's something deeper he's been missing in his own life. With that realization, Mark's life takes a turn. As he starts to open up more to Eleanor, their bond grows stronger. They begin to work together, not just as business partners but as two people who are slowly learning to trust each other. But as their relationship deepens, Mark finds himself at a crossroads. Can he really accept this new life with Eleanor, a life built on a contract but slowly being filled with real feelings? Or will the pressure of their arrangement break everything they've started to build? Let's see where their journey leads, and whether love can truly blossom from a marriage made for convenience. As the weeks passed, Mark settled into a life he never expected. His new home, Eleanor's grand estate, was a far cry from the cramped apartment he once shared with his mother. The mansion's towering columns and intricate stone facade stood like a fortress, hiding a world that Mark was still trying to understand. Despite the luxury, he felt like an outsider. Eleanor, the woman he had married out of necessity, remained distant, wrapped up in her own world of business deals and social obligations. The contract they had signed was clear: no love, no strings attached, just companionship for her and financial security for him. Yet, as time went on, something changed. Mark found himself observing Eleanor in ways he hadn't before. He noticed how the weight of her decisions seemed to wear on her, how her sharp, businesslike demeanor sometimes cracked to reveal a lonely woman beneath. But he kept his distance, reminding himself that this was just business. He had to focus on the reason he was here: to keep his family safe, to get through law school, to get his life back on track. Eleanor never asked for love, but over time, Mark began to wonder if he could give it. He was still unsure, still uncertain about the woman he had married. But there was something about her, something that drew him in, even though he wasn't sure why. Their interactions were often brief, mostly limited to dinners and public appearances. Mark would attend events with Eleanor, playing the role of her husband for the night, but always feeling like an actor in someone else's play. He had never been a part of a world like this: gala dinners, charity events, endless handshakes and smiles. Eleanor, on the other hand, navigated it all with ease, her smile never faltering as she charmed the crowd. Mark, in contrast, often found himself standing in the shadows, unsure of his place. He was just a temporary fixture, a man who had agreed to this arrangement for the sake of his future, not because he wanted to be part of this world. Yet, as the days went by, he found himself becoming more comfortable in Eleanor's presence. She would talk to him during their quiet moments, telling him stories of her past, of the people she had lost, of the legacy she had worked so hard to build. The walls between them began to crack, and Mark started to see her not just as a businesswoman but as a person, someone who had made sacrifices to get to where she was. And it was in these moments, when they were alone, that Mark started to feel something he hadn't expected: a growing sense of connection. But the reality of their arrangement kept pulling him back. He had agreed to this marriage because it was the only way to solve his financial troubles. There was no room for love, no room for anything other than the contract they had signed. Yet, as they spent more time together, as they shared more conversations and quiet dinners, Mark found himself torn between the man he had been, the man who had come to Eleanor's estate with nothing, and the man he was becoming, someone who was starting to care for the woman he had married. Eleanor, too, seemed to sense the shift. She no longer treated him as just her husband for the contract. There were moments when she let her guard down, moments when she was just Eleanor, a woman who had lived a life filled with loneliness, who had learned to rely only on herself. She had no family, no close friends, only the business she had built from the ground up. In those rare moments of vulnerability, Mark saw a side of her that few people ever would. It made him wonder if there was more to their relationship than just a contract. But he couldn't let himself fall for her. Not yet. He had to remind himself that this was all temporary, that he couldn't afford to let emotions get in the way of his goals. Then, one evening, at a lavish charity gala, everything changed. Eleanor was being honored for her philanthropic work, and Mark attended with her, as always. The event was filled with wealthy elites, all eager to celebrate Eleanor's success. Mark, however, felt like a fish out of water. As Eleanor moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, Mark stood off to the side, nursing a glass of champagne and watching the spectacle. It was in that moment that he saw her differently. As she spoke with the other guests, laughing and smiling, there was something in her eyes, something that told him she wasn't as invulnerable as she seemed. She was human, just like him. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had spent so much time focusing on the contract, on the deal, that he had forgotten the most important part of any relationship: the people involved. Eleanor wasn't just a businesswoman, she wasn't just his wife for a visa. She was a woman who had built her empire alone, who had sacrificed everything to get where she was. And suddenly, Mark couldn't deny it any longer, was falling for her. Mark's heart raced as he watched her interact with the crowd, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Was this what he really wanted? Was this what he needed? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for certain: his feelings for Eleanor were no longer just part of the arrangement. Something real was beginning to take root, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. He needed to talk to her, to figure out where they stood. But as he made his way through the crowd to find her, something stopped him. Eleanor was deep in conversation with a man he didn't recognize, her smile wide, her laughter filling the air. Mark froze, feeling a pang of jealousy he hadn't expected. He quickly turned away, retreating to the corner of the room. He needed to get control of his emotions. He needed to focus on the contract, not his growing feelings for Eleanor. But the more he tried to push those feelings away, the harder it became to ignore them. As the night wore on, Mark couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this marriage than he had ever imagined. He had come here with nothing but desperation, but now, for the first time, he could see a future with Eleanor. A future that wasn't just about survival, but about something more. And maybe, just maybe, he could find freedom in this unexpected place. As Mark stepped back into the shadows of the gala, his mind was racing. He had just seen Eleanor laugh and chat effortlessly with the man across the room, and it stirred something in him that he wasn't ready to acknowledge. His heart twisted, and a surge of jealousy washed over him, something he never thought he would feel in this situation. After all, this marriage was supposed to be about convenience, a simple contract with no strings attached. Yet here he was, feeling emotions he hadn't planned for. He had spent so much time keeping his feelings in check, focusing only on his survival, on making sure that the financial stability they had agreed on would come through. But now, he wasn't sure anymore. Eleanor had become more than just a means to an end. She had become a person he couldn't stop thinking about. Mark tried to shake the feeling off as he excused himself from the corner, making his way toward the balcony to clear his head. The night air was cool, and the city lights glittered below, a stark contrast to the chaos inside the ballroom. He needed a moment alone to gather his thoughts. He leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the stars above. The cold wind helped steady his thoughts, but the truth was, he couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor. He had come to the gala with a clear purpose: to support her, to continue with the arrangement. But now, he found himself questioning everything. Was he just fooling himself? Was he actually falling for her? And what did that mean for his future? Was he still the man who had agreed to this marriage for practical reasons, or was he someone else entirely now? Minutes passed, and Mark heard the soft clicking of heels behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know it was her. Eleanor had always been able to find him, whether it was in the crowded gala or in the solitude of the estate. She stepped up beside him, her presence filling the space around them. She was silent at first, standing there for a moment before speaking in her usual calm tone, though there was something different in her voice. "You always disappear like this," Eleanor said softly, looking out over the balcony. What are you thinking about? She didn't look at him, but Mark could feel the weight of her gaze. He hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond. He couldn't lie to her, not now, not when he was so close to understanding the truth of his feelings. But how could he say what he was thinking without complicating things even further? He took a deep breath, his hand gripping the railing a little tighter. I'm thinking about how I didn't expect any of this, he admitted, his voice low. How things were supposed to be easier. Just a contract, a way out of my situation. But now, it feels like there's something more to it. He glanced over at her, his heart pounding in his chest. I never thought I'd say this, but it feels real. Eleanor looked at him then, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just took in what he had said. Mark couldn't read her face. Her mask was still firmly in place. But then she spoke, and her words were soft, almost gentle. I thought we agreed on the terms, Mark, she said, her voice a little quieter than usual. This wasn't supposed to be about emotions. It was supposed to be about stability, about security. For both of us. And now, you're telling me it's something more? Mark's chest tightened as her words hit him. He had known it would be complicated, but hearing it from her made everything feel more real, more final. She was right, of course. They had agreed to a deal, and it had been clear from the start that this was not about love. It was about survival. Yet here he was, standing on the balcony, feeling something he couldn't explain. Eleanor was right to keep her distance. She had no reason to let herself get attached. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. That he had changed. He turned to face her fully now, his hands in his pockets, his posture shifting from one of uncertainty to one of resolve. I know we agreed on the terms, he said, his voice steady now, though there was still a hint of vulnerability. But that doesn't mean I can't feel something more. And I don't know if I'm ready to let it go. He looked at her, the words hanging between them. There was a long silence as Eleanor considered his words. The sound of the city below was distant, a soft hum that seemed far away from the intensity of the moment they were sharing. Finally, she spoke again, her voice soft but firm. Mark, this was always going to be complicated, she said, her gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before meeting his eyes. But I can't pretend that I haven't noticed the changes in you either. I never planned for this. I never expected you to feel anything beyond what we agreed upon. But now, we're both in this together, whether we want to admit it or not. And I don't know where this goes from here. She paused, her lips pressed into a tight line. I need time to think about this. We need time to think about what this means for both of us. She turned to leave, but then she stopped and added one last thing. Don't forget, Mark. Whatever happens, we made a deal. And that deal has to mean something. With that, Eleanor walked back into the gala, leaving Mark standing alone once again. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time since their marriage began, Mark realized that they were no longer just two people playing a role. This had become something far more complicated, something neither of them had planned for. And as the night went on, Mark couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The next few days felt like a blur for Mark. After his conversation with Eleanor on the balcony, he couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. Her words echoed in his mind as if they were a reminder of the fine line they were walking. A deal. A contract. That's all it was supposed to be. But now, something was different. Eleanor was right about one thing: this was complicated. He had entered this arrangement with one clear purpose: survival. But now, he was starting to wonder if he could keep his feelings in check any longer. Mark found himself avoiding Eleanor over the next few days, not because he didn't want to talk to her, but because he wasn't sure how to face her. He had never expected to feel anything more than what was already agreed upon. They had signed a contract, and that should have been enough. But the more he reflected, the more he realized that he had already crossed a line. Eleanor had started to mean something to him, something real. And that terrified him. On the fifth evening after their conversation, Mark was sitting in his study, staring at his textbooks, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Eleanor. She had given him space after their talk, which only made him more aware of how much he missed their interactions. But he had promised himself he would stay focused on his future, on his family's security. His emotions couldn't get in the way. Not now. Just as he was about to stand up and go to bed, he heard a knock on his door. He hesitated for a moment, not sure who it was, but then he opened it. To his surprise, Eleanor was standing there, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. She was dressed simply, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. It was the first time he had seen her without the usual armor of her polished persona. "We need to talk," Eleanor said, her voice calm but firm. Mark stepped aside to let her in, unsure of what to expect. She closed the door softly behind her and sat down on the edge of his desk, facing him. There was a long silence as she seemed to gather her thoughts, and Mark couldn't help but watch her closely. She looked different, almost vulnerable, but still determined. "I've been thinking about what you said," Eleanor began, her eyes meeting his. "And I've realized that we're both in a situation neither of us planned for. You're not the only one who feels conflicted about this marriage. I've tried to keep my distance because I thought it would make things easier, but I see now that it's not that simple." Mark's heart skipped a beat. Hearing her say that she was feeling the same things he was left him both relieved and scared. Relieved because it meant he wasn't the only one struggling with the emotions that had surfaced, but scared because it meant they were about to cross a line that neither of them could take back. "Eleanor, Mark started, but she held up a hand, stopping him. "Let me finish," she said softly. "I know this is a mess. I know we didn't come into this with the same expectations. But now, I can't help but wonder if we've both been avoiding what's right in front of us. I never planned on falling for anyone, let alone you. And I know you didn't expect this either. But I think we've both changed since we signed that contract. Maybe we owe it to ourselves to see where this can go." She paused, her eyes softening. "Maybe we need to stop pretending that this is just a business arrangement. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that this could be something more." Mark stared at her, his mind racing. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. For so long, he had kept his emotions in check, telling himself this was just a means to an end. But now, Eleanor was saying the words he had been afraid to admit to himself. Was it possible? Could this really become something more than a contract? He didn't know. All he knew was that the more time he spent with her, the more he felt something he couldn't ignore. He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the desk as he processed her words. "Eleanor," he said slowly, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts inside him, "I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know what this means for us. But I do know that I can't keep pretending I'm not feeling something. You've already changed my life in ways I didn't expect." He looked at her, his gaze serious, almost vulnerable. "But I don't know if I can risk everything for something that's uncertain." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I get it, Mark," she replied softly. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions now. I'm just asking you to be honest with me. And with yourself. We don't have to have all the answers tonight. But we owe it to each other to explore what this could be. To at least see where this path might lead." Mark let out a breath, his heart still pounding. Eleanor was right. He couldn't keep hiding from what was happening between them. But what would it mean for their future? Could they really have a life together, or was this just a temporary change in the course of their lives? As Eleanor stood to leave, she gave him one last look, her expression soft but determined. "We'll figure it out," she said quietly. "Together. But only if you're ready to stop hiding from what's real." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving Mark standing there, unsure of everything but certain of one thing: their lives had changed forever. Mark watched her leave, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. There was no going back now. Whatever came next, he would have to face it head-on. The days that followed were filled with a sense of uncertainty for Mark. After his conversation with Eleanor, he couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. Her words lingered in his mind, and for the first time since their marriage, he felt truly torn. He had entered this arrangement with one clear goal: survival. But now, as he navigated through his daily routines, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer just playing a part. Eleanor had become more than just the woman he had married for practical reasons. She had become someone he cared about, and that terrified him. Mark tried to maintain the distance he had promised himself, focusing on his studies and the tasks he needed to complete. But it wasn't easy. Every time he saw Eleanor, whether it was at dinner or during one of their public events, something inside him pulled him closer to her. She was still the same woman, the wealthy, powerful businesswoman who had no time for love. But now, when he looked at her, he saw a vulnerability in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. It was subtle, but it was there, and it made him wonder if she felt the same way he did. One evening, as Mark sat in the library of their estate, buried in his textbooks, he heard footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Eleanor's presence had become unmistakable. She approached him quietly, her footsteps light on the marble floors. Mark's heart skipped a beat as she stopped in front of him, her gaze soft but determined. "Mark," she began, her voice steady but with a hint of something softer beneath it. "I've been thinking about everything. About what you said, and about what I said. And I think it's time we stop pretending this is just about a contract. This is real, Mark. And we both know it." She paused for a moment, her eyes meeting his. "I want us to try, Mark. I want to see where this can go. No more hiding behind the agreement. Just us." Mark felt a rush of emotions flood through him as she spoke. He had tried so hard to keep his feelings buried, to focus on the practical aspects of their arrangement. But now, Eleanor was asking him to face the truth. To stop pretending that this was just a business deal. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. The weight of her words pressed down on him, and he realized that everything had changed. He could no longer deny what had been growing between them. "I've been afraid," Mark admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Afraid of what this could mean, afraid of what might happen if we actually let ourselves feel something real. But I can't keep pretending anymore. I don't want to keep pretending." Eleanor's expression softened, and she reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his. The simple gesture spoke volumes, more than words ever could. For a moment, they just stood there, silently acknowledging the change that had occurred between them. The contract, the deal, it all felt distant now. In its place was something raw and real, something neither of them had expected. "So, what now?" Mark asked, his heart still racing. "What do we do with all this, with us?" Eleanor smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Now, we take it one step at a time," she said. "We stop hiding from what's real. We build something together, not based on a contract, but on trust. And on the possibility of something more." She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what the future holds, but I want to find out with you." Mark felt a surge of emotion that he hadn't expected. It wasn't just relief. It was hope. For the first time since their marriage began, he could see a future with Eleanor. A real future, not just a way to escape the past. He reached out, taking her hand in his, and for the first time, he felt the weight of their connection off something that was no longer just about survival, but about living. Together, Mark said, his voice steady now, as if the uncertainty had finally lifted. We'll face it together. No more pretending. He squeezed her hand, feeling a sense of clarity that had eluded him for so long. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk together. And that was enough. As Eleanor looked at him, a sense of calm washed over her. She had never imagined this moment. Never thought that she would find herself in this position, with Mark by her side, willing to take that step forward. But here they were, at the beginning of something neither of them had expected. And for the first time, Eleanor felt hopeful about the future. No contracts, no conditions, just the two of them, ready to see where their journey would take them. The future was no longer just a matter of survival. It was about finding something real, something meaningful, together. The days following their conversation felt different for Mark and Eleanor. For the first time in months, they were no longer just two people bound by a contract. They had taken a step toward something more. Mark couldn't remember the last time he had felt this way, this sense of possibility, this hope for something real. Eleanor's presence no longer felt like a distant, unapproachable figure. She was no longer just the woman who had saved him from financial ruin. She was now someone he was beginning to care for in ways that went beyond the arrangement they had made. They spent more time together now, though their relationship still felt fragile, like something they had to protect. Every conversation, every quiet moment shared between them seemed to hold the weight of something new, something they were both unsure of. Mark could feel the tension between them, the pull of their growing feelings, but neither of them dared to speak of it too openly. The fear of crossing a line still lingered, but it was a different kind of fear now, a fear of losing what they had begun to build, rather than a fear of the unknown. One evening, as they sat together in the drawing room of the estate, a fire crackling softly in the fireplace, Mark couldn't help but notice how much had changed. They were no longer just playing roles. They were two people who were starting to build something together. Eleanor, for all her strength and success, was still someone who had known what it was like to be alone, to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. Mark had learned that she wasn't just the cold, distant woman he had first met. She was kind, compassionate, and surprisingly vulnerable in her own way. "Mark, I've been thinking," Eleanor said, her voice softer than usual, almost hesitant. She turned to face him, her expression serious, yet filled with a quiet warmth. "I know we've been taking things slowly, and I think that's the right approach. But I need to be honest with you. I've never let anyone get close to me like this before. I've built walls around myself for so long, convinced that I didn't need anyone. But now, with you, I'm starting to realize that I was wrong. I've been afraid of what it would mean to let someone in, to let myself be vulnerable. But I think I'm ready to try." She paused, as if searching for the right words. "I think I'm ready to let you in, Mark. Completely." She looked down for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. "I don't know where this is going, but I want to find out with you." She met his gaze, her eyes steady. Mark's heart raced as he listened to her words. For the longest time, he had been afraid to admit his own feelings, afraid of what would happen if he let himself fall for Eleanor. But now, hearing her speak so honestly, so vulnerably, made him realize that he wasn't alone in this. She was just as scared as he was, just as uncertain. And that realization changed everything. "Eleanor," Mark said, his voice low and sincere. "I've been trying so hard to protect myself, to stay focused on what we agreed upon. But the truth is, I can't deny what I feel for you anymore. I've been fighting it, but it's impossible. I care about you, Eleanor. More than I ever thought I would. And I want to see where this can go, too. He reached out, taking her hand gently in his. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I want to find out with you. He smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in months. Together. No more hiding, no more pretending. Just us. Eleanor's face softened, and she squeezed his hand in return. The warmth between them was undeniable, and in that moment, all the uncertainty, all the fear they had both been holding on to, seemed to fade away. They were no longer bound by a contract, by an arrangement. They were simply two people who had found each other, and for the first time, they were willing to take a chance on something real. As they sat there, hands entwined, Mark felt a sense of peace wash over him. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. They had both stepped into the unknown together, and that was enough. The contract they had signed no longer mattered. What mattered now was the connection they had forged, the bond they were starting to build. And for Mark, that was worth everything. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling fire the only sound filling the room. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, one that neither of them had expected, but both of them desperately needed. And in that silence, they both knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Weeks passed since that pivotal night, and Mark and Eleanor continued to navigate the delicate balance between the contract they had once signed and the real feelings that had blossomed between them. They had spent countless hours talking, laughing, and slowly revealing pieces of themselves to each other. Every moment felt like a discovery, an unfolding story they were writing together. Yet, despite the closeness they had built, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The weight of their past still hung over them, and he knew that sooner or later, they would have to face it. One afternoon, as they sat together in Eleanor's study, Mark felt a familiar tension in the air. He had been quiet for days, lost in thought, trying to reconcile his growing feelings for her with the life they had originally agreed upon. Eleanor seemed to sense his unease. She had always been able to read him in ways no one else could. She looked up from the papers she had been reviewing and met his gaze. "Mark, what's going on? You've been distant lately," she said softly, her voice filled with concern. "I can feel something's off. You don't have to hide it from me." She paused, putting the papers aside, her full attention now on him. Mark sighed, his gaze dropping to his hands as he fidgeted with the pen he had been absent-mindedly twirling. He knew it was time to be honest with her. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice quiet. "Thinking about everything we've built together. About what this marriage means now. And I just feel like I'm on the verge of losing myself. I'm falling for you, Eleanor. I can't deny it anymore." He looked up at her then, his eyes searching hers for any hint of what she might be feeling. "But I also feel like I'm losing control of everything, my own life, my own choices. This wasn't supposed to be about love. It was supposed to be about stability, survival. And I'm scared that I'm letting everything else slip away in the process." For a moment, Eleanor didn't speak. She simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. Mark could feel the weight of his confession hanging in the air between them. But then she moved, slowly crossing the room to where he sat. She knelt down in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "Mark, you've never had to lose yourself in this. You don't have to give up your life for this marriage. Not for me, not for anyone." Her voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in her eyes that caught him off guard. "I never asked you to change who you are. And I never wanted you to feel trapped. I understand that we came into this with different expectations, but I also know that we've both changed since then. And it's okay, if that means we have to make new choices. Together." her words hit Mark like a wave. He had been so focused on the fear of losing control that he hadn't stopped to consider that maybe he wasn't losing himself at all. Maybe he was simply allowing himself to become someone better, someone who could share his life, his heart, with another person. Eleanor's words were a lifeline he hadn't realized he needed. "You're right," Mark whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been afraid of losing myself, but maybe it's not about losing anything. Maybe it's about gaining something. Something I didn't expect. Something real." He squeezed her hands, feeling the warmth of her touch grounding him. "I don't want to lose you, Eleanor. I don't want to lose us." He paused, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm ready to face this. All of it. With you." For the first time in weeks, Eleanor smiled, her eyes softening with relief. She leaned forward and kissed his forehead gently, a gesture that was filled with both tenderness and understanding. "We'll face it together, Mark," she whispered. "Whatever happens, we're in this together. And that's all that matters." Mark felt a sense of peace wash over him, a calm he hadn't expected. In that moment, everything that had felt so complicated seemed to make sense. They were no longer just two people trying to survive. They were partners, facing the future together, whatever it might hold. And for the first time, Mark truly believed that they could make it work. As they stood together, hand in hand, ready to take on whatever challenges the world threw their way, Mark knew one thing for certain: the future was theirs to create, and he wasn't afraid to take the next step with Eleanor by his side. The weeks following their conversation were a turning point for both Mark and Eleanor. They had made a decision to stop hiding from their feelings, to stop pretending that their relationship was just a formality. But as much as they wanted to move forward, they both knew there were still unresolved issues lurking in the background. For Eleanor, it was the pressure of maintaining the empire she had built alone, while for Mark, it was the fear of what would happen if their feelings were exposed to the world. The life they had started to build together was still fragile, and neither of them wanted to risk everything. It was one afternoon when their world was suddenly shaken. They had just returned from a quiet lunch, enjoying a rare moment of peace away from the public eye, when Mark's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and felt a chill run down his spine. It was from Eleanor's lawyer, David. With a sense of foreboding, he answered the call. "Mark, you need to come to the office as soon as possible," David's voice was urgent. "There's something we need to discuss. It's about the company. Something has come up, and it's serious." Mark's heart raced as he heard the panic in David's voice. He quickly told Eleanor, who immediately became serious, her eyes narrowing with concern. She didn't say a word, but Mark could see the anxiety growing in her expression. They both knew that this moment would change everything. They drove to the office in silence, the weight of the situation settling in. When they arrived, they were immediately ushered into David's office, where a few other key members of the company were gathered. David stood up as they entered, his face grave. "It's about your business dealings, Eleanor," David began, his tone heavy. "There are some financial irregularities that have been flagged. It looks like someone is trying to undermine the company. We've been monitoring it for a while, and we believe it might be an inside job." He paused, letting the information sink in. "This could be a huge scandal, Eleanor. If this gets out, it could affect everything you've worked so hard to build." David's eyes shifted to Mark for a brief moment before he continued, "And it could involve people you trust." The room fell silent as Eleanor processed the news. Mark could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched into fists as she tried to remain composed. For years, she had worked tirelessly to build her empire, and now, it was all at risk. The woman who had once seemed so strong, so untouchable, suddenly looked vulnerable. Mark's heart went out to her as he watched the weight of the situation settle over her. "Eleanor, you don't have to face this alone," Mark said quietly, stepping forward. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder, his voice steady. "We'll figure this out together. You don't have to do this by yourself." He knew she had been carrying the burden of her empire alone for so long, and now it was time for him to be there for her. To show her that they were partners, no matter what happened. Eleanor met his gaze, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, a sense of relief, knowing she didn't have to fight this battle alone. She nodded slowly, the walls she had built up beginning to crack as she allowed herself to lean on Mark for the first time. "We'll get through this," Eleanor said, her voice low but determined. "I've always fought my battles alone, but I see now that I don't have to. You've been by my side through everything, and I'm not going to push you away now." She turned to David, her expression hardening. "Let's find out who's behind this, and let's deal with it." She was back. The woman who had built everything from the ground up, the woman who wasn't going to let anyone tear it all down. As the team began to strategize, Mark stood by Eleanor's side, feeling the strength of their bond grow even more. This was their turning point. They had faced their fears, acknowledged their feelings, and now they were ready to face whatever challenges came their way. Eleanor wasn't just the woman who had once given him a chance at a better life. She was his partner, his equal, and together, they could handle anything. As the meeting ended and they walked out of the office, Eleanor squeezed Mark's hand. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. They were no longer just a business arrangement. They were a team. And whatever happened next, they would face it together, stronger than ever. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of action as Mark and Eleanor worked tirelessly to uncover the truth behind the threat to her business. Every day brought new revelations, new pieces of the puzzle falling into place. It turned out that the person behind the financial sabotage was someone Eleanor had once considered a close confidant, someone she had trusted implicitly. The betrayal cut deep, but it also strengthened their resolve. Mark and Eleanor were determined to protect everything they had built, together. Throughout the ordeal, their bond grew stronger. Eleanor, the once indomitable woman who had always carried her burdens alone, finally allowed herself to lean on Mark, and he stood by her without hesitation. Their partnership had transformed from a simple contract into something real, something they both valued deeply. Mark's feelings for her had only deepened as they navigated the crisis side by side. He had never imagined that a marriage made out of necessity could lead to something so meaningful. But here they were, facing the future as true partners. The day finally came when they confronted the person responsible for the scheme. It was a tense meeting, filled with heated words and a sense of justice hanging in the air. But in the end, Eleanor's strength and leadership prevailed. The company was saved, and the damage was minimized. The scandal was contained, and the people responsible were held accountable. It was a victory, but it was also a turning point. Eleanor knew that she couldn't do this alone anymore. She had someone who had proven himself to be more than just a husband on paper. In the aftermath of the crisis, Mark and Eleanor found themselves at a crossroads. They had come so far, but the future still felt uncertain. The contract that had originally brought them together no longer held any weight. They had built a life, a partnership, founded on trust and mutual respect. But what did that mean now? Was there still room for love in their relationship? Could they truly let go of the past and embrace a future together? One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their estate, overlooking the city below, Mark turned to Eleanor. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. The world seemed to be at peace for the first time in a long while. Eleanor was looking out at the view, but when she felt Mark's gaze on her, she turned to meet his eyes. "Eleanor," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I never thought this would be my life. I never thought I'd end up here, with you, facing everything we've been through. But now, I know this is where I'm meant to be. With you." He paused, his heart pounding in his chest. "I know I can't change the past, and I know there's still a lot we have to figure out. But I want to build the future with you. I want to be by your side, not just because of the contract, but because I love you." He reached out and took her hand in his touch gentle but firm. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat as she listened to him. For a moment, she was silent, her mind racing with everything they had been through. But as she looked into Mark's eyes, she saw the truth in his words. He wasn't the man who had once been desperate for survival. He was someone she had come to trust, to care for, and, yes, to love. "Mark," she said softly, her voice trembling with the emotion she had kept hidden for so long, "I love you too. I've never been good at this. I've always kept my heart closed off, but you've shown me what it means to truly live, to truly feel. I don't know what the future holds, but I want it to be with you. I want to build something real, something lasting. Together." She squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle between them. For the first time, Mark and Eleanor knew that the future was theirs to create. No longer bound by a contract or an arrangement, they had found something far more precious. They had found love, and they had found it in each other. As the sun set behind them, they sat together in silence, their hearts intertwined, ready to face whatever the future might bring. Together, they were stronger than ever.